Okay, looks like we are now live. Hopefully everyone can see us and hear us. Welcome SBIers to today's webinar on Pinterest. Now, before we jump in, I want to thank Kath and Aaron for putting together the Pinterest Action Guide and the challenge that's going on right now in the forums. And if you haven't yet started, it's not too late. I will put a link into the comments for you right now. Make sure you go over there and jump into the challenge. Now, for those who don't know me, I'm Mike Alton, and I am privileged to be Site Sales Chief Marketing Officer. And I'm joined by my good friend and Pinterest expert, Jeff Sieh. Jeff is from the great state of Texas, is the beard behind mainly Pinterest tips, and he's an accomplished speaker on Pinterest and visual marketing in general. Thanks for being here today, Jeff.
That's awesome, Mike. Yeah, you are not a slouch at Pinterest either. I mean, you were one of the first mainly Pinterest tippers when we started that show back in the day. So yeah, you're no slouch either. So
thank you for that. So, Jeff, I want to fill you in as to kind of why we're doing this. Our members, they've been studying a new panel we've created on how to get started with Pinterest that we call the Pinterest Action Guide. And just recently we kicked off a Pinterest challenge in our forums that has members going through the guide together and sharing their Pinterest activities and accomplishments. So not surprisingly, they have a few questions for you. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, let's get to it. So the first question, what makes for a great pinnable image?
A great pinnable image will be one that is, we get a little bit of echo. Let's see what's going on here. Is one that stands out in the feed, but on Pinterest, and it's it's mentioned in the guide, is what works best is the portrait style pins, not the landscape ones, which is kind of, it's hard when you first get started because most people create blog images and stuff like that in that landscape format. So what I use on my side is I use a plugin called Social Warfare, which allows me to use, when somebody clicks on Pinterest to share, it automatically has a pinnable image that is in that correct orientation. The size that I like to use is the same size if you go over to Canva to create a pinnable image, which is 735 by 1102. Some other people like to use 564 by 916. I just usually go with what Canva has for my things because it's really easy to use. And for bloggers and people who aren't really like selling just products, a good pinnable image is one that has a good call to action. Like if you're doing your blog, you want to have your title in there and have it a clear text overlay. And because Pinterest, they say like 80%, but I think it's closer to 90 or 95 of Pinterest traffic comes from a mobile device. You need to double check and make sure that image is going to look good on a mobile device. A lot of times I'll see people do some, it seems to be a lot of lifestyle bloggers, a lot of Instagrammers and like wedding photographers. They love to use those scripty fonts, and it may look great on Photoshop on your desktop, but when it gets down into the screen, those swirly little fonts are a little hard to read. So you want to make sure your text overlay on your pins are really clear. The image is telling the story that you can still notice when you're on a mobile screen. So that's kind of what the default for a pinnable image is to me.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I'm with you. When I'm making my blog images, I'm doing it in Canva, and I just select their default size. Yeah. I used to share those to Google Plus as well as Pinterest, but
yeah.
Anyways,
I usually go to whenever like I can't remember what the Twitter card images are or whatever for any social network. I usually just because I do a lot of mine over on Photoshop anyway, but I go to Canva to get the dimensions because if I can't remember them, so that's what I usually do for images.
Cool. Now, you talked about fonts, so let's talk about the image itself. For instance, I know you're a huge fan of stock imagery, right?
Yeah, I'm not a good. I tell everybody I'm not a good photographer, but I am a good stock photographer. So, and one of the things there's if you on my site there's a free download. It's called the Manly Pinterest Tips Tackle Box, and it's got a lot of these things we'll be talking about today built in, like where to get these resources for free images and stuff like that. Free images are great, and I think like if you are really super limited on a budget, that would be the first place to start, like pexels.com or someplace like that. But I buy all my images for my site and for my blog and even presentations that I do. And the reason is this is those free sites, which are great, get hit hard by bloggers and businesses and everybody else. And I can usually go, oh, I've seen that. It was funny when we were at Social Media Marketing World. In my presentation, I said, quit using that picture with the guy holding the banana, because there's this stock photography guy who he does awesome photography, but it's free and everybody uses him. And I said that, and then my friend Ian Anderson Gray had that same slide, that same dude in his presentation. So, but my thing is, you want to stand out anywhere on social media, and especially Pinterest, which Pinterest is all about images. And so if they're seeing the same image for a text overlay for yours or something else, I will pay for it. And the best place I go to is Deposit Photos. There's a little secret hack, AppSumo, which is a great resource. Every couple times a year, they come out with this program that they partner with Deposit Photos, and you can get like these credits that never expire that lets you download any size image for like $30, and I just load up on those things. And so I think I have like almost 1,000 credits sitting in my account that I use, and I just go there. I go to Deposit Photos. 123 royalty free is another great resource. But the other thing is when you go and let's say you are writing a post about getting your blog, the reach of your blog. You're writing, like Mike would write something about that. And so I think of the image I want. I'm thinking, okay, I want like one of those radio towers with waves coming off of them. So I can go to these free sites and search and look for that image that's going to work, and maybe somebody else will use it. But I can pay $3 to $5, go and type exactly what I want in one of these paid sites like Deposit Photos, and boom, I can find it. To me, saving that amount of time and having an image that is unique to me is worth the money that you will spend on those images for your blog or for your business. And then you can, if you are using free sites, change them up, rotate them differently, have them cropped in tighter. I always get the maximum amount of, when I buy a photo, the maximum size that I can afford, because that gives me more options to turn it, to crop it in, to do it a different way than somebody else who's just slapping it on with a text overlay and being done with it.
That's a really good point. Reusing those, having a different look, while still kind of keeping within your own overall brand image. Now, you mentioned let's say royalty free, which got me thinking about royalties and copyrights. What kind of concerns are there when it comes to Pinterest and creating images for Pinterest, when it comes to commercial usage and all these different legalese terms that we see on images?
I will say this: if you're a good photographer or even a decent photographer, I would use your own images and take those. One, it's your brand, and you never have to worry about any of that stuff ever. And that's the best case use. But like I said, I'm not that great of a photographer. I am a good stock photographer. So on that kind of thing, you want to make sure, and that's one of the reasons I went with these paid sites, because I know that I own the license to use that in a certain way. Sometimes when you use Creative Commons or some of those other sites that pull from Creative Commons or something like that, there's different rules. You have to give attribution, you have to do this kind of stuff, and that may change if the author decides they want to make it later on to be, you have to give me attribution or whatever, and you don't know that, and you've used it. I just don't want to mess with that, and that's another reason I pay for the stuff. There are some limitations when you do even pay for them. You need to make sure on every site that you're buying the royalty-free images from, that read their license agreement, because like for Deposit Photos, for example, I can use that on my website, my blog, on an ebook that is for free. If I change that and I charge for that ebook, I have to buy what's called an extended license. If I make it and put it on a mug and I give that away to my clients for free, I can just use the regular license. If I sell that mug, then I have to buy an extended license. So if you're doing products, you need to watch those licenses. Just read and be careful and then if you have a question, just email them and they'll tell you. I mean, if you're like, hey, I want to use it for this, you can email those and I've done it multiple times, and they'll tell me what I can and can't use that image for. But most of the time, for blog images going to Pinterest, back to your blog and all that sort of stuff, you're fine with using those licenses for credit kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important to have kind of a set pattern, you know, a set thing that you do for the images that you create, places that you go, whether you're creating your own images or, like you said, going to deposit photos, because then you learn this stuff once
Right.
for that particular provider. Like if it's your own image, you don't have to do anything. But if you're getting the images from a particular source, you need to look at what their licensing is, what their usage, because not every site's the same, not every source is the same, and you don't want to just start Googling for certain images and landing on random sites, because then you're going to waste a lot of time
And
trying
never never steal images from Google image search. Don't just go save as and use that. Google image search is a great way for you to find if somebody's stealing your images, but that's not a good place to find images for your site. So and that's the other reason I buy my own images. Even some of those free sites, they want you to give attribution, and I just think that looks hinky on a website. I just don't. If I have a blog image, I don't want to have a little thing underneath there that says, you know, the photo credit to blah. I just don't want to do that. I want to have my content, my image that I have made look stunning, and that's it.
Right. Now, I think it might have been you in San Diego who said, if you want to create an image like for a page or something like that, and yeah, it was you. You said you use Google image search to get ideas,
Right.
for what other people have done. I thought that was great. I've done that a number of times myself. I want to create an image that talks about excitement or something like that, you know. So just Google excitement and look at the images that are associated with that word and give yourself some inspiration, and then go find a real image someplace else, like we were just talking about.
And so the example I used in that talk was that I had a quote by Mark Twain about imagination, and I was like, what? And I went and did a Google image search on imagination, and because I didn't want the same old, you know, light bulb that everybody uses for a stock image. You know, that's another thing. Always try to think outside the box so you stand out in your feed. And so I Googled imagination, and somehow I saw an elephant, and I went, oh, and then I went and Googled, and there was this kind of fantasy elephant kind of picture, and it worked great for what I was using. But exactly, use it to spur your imagination, but don't use it to steal.
Cool. So now that you've found the image, like that elephant or something like that, what are some of the tools that you use to actually build that pinnable image?
If you don't have any design skills, you know, or you're really limited in time or whatever, use Canva. It's a great resource. They have some templates. I think it's still, you can buy, there's a bunch of free templates, but if you want to buy one, they're like $1 each when you add them, and you can check out. It's a great place to start. If you struggle with that, you could even have you can hire a designer to create you templates in Canva, which I have done for clients before. So if you don't just have them and always have to rely on that designer to make every image, I would have him make a set of templates that you could drop in a new photo for. The text overlay would be the same. Maybe your logo would be the same, but he's already designed all that. You just change out the image and change the text. So that's an option. I use Photoshop a lot for mine just because I've been using it for years. PicMonkey is a great place to use images. So be careful with some of the web apps like Over and some of the other ones. They have these fonts that you can use to create images with, but they're not licensed for commercial use. And so that's why I don't use Over anymore for like Instagram, because I'm a business and technically I'm breaking their terms of service when I don't have license for that font. So and now Over has lets you actually take those fonts and upload them, and you can use fonts that you've purchased or are commercially free. So even fonts, you need to double check to make sure you're using the right, commercial free stuff. So but things like Canva and Adobe Spark Post is another great place to make images. Now those are licensed fonts. The ones that are in there you're able to use for commercial purposes. So that's another reason I recommend Canva.
Now, one of the interesting things that I know that it's happening right now with some of our members, they've had these great sites for years. They've created hundreds of pages. Mm-hmm. And so now they're thinking, oh my, I have to go back and create a Pinterest image for each one of those pages. And I know for using templates in Canva and that sort of thing, it can kind of speed up the process. But you've been using a service recently. Was it Design Pickle?
Oh yeah. I love Design Pickle.
That might be of interest to a couple people.
It is. It's like unlimited design for you for a flat fee. So it's great. I don't use them for my blog images. I use them actually for a t-shirt company that I do, and so they create images for that. But it's great. So it's unlimited design. You pay a fee, and you kind of put it in a queue, and they work on them. It's not. There's some things that I have to send back. It's not up to my level. But for most stuff, for like if you need a service to put images on text and find images and all that stuff, it works really well. And that may be something we could drop the link in there later for that service. But yeah, they're out of Phoenix. They're American based. Then they work with VAs over in Thailand, I believe, and they're the ones who are doing the stuff. And it's really good service. I've been pleased with it. But yeah, you hire a designer if you don't want to do it yourself. If you got a bunch in the background, find a plugin maybe that will help. So you don't have to change them all out. I actually don't even put the pinnable image on my blog posts. I just use, like I mentioned, Social Warfare that will pin the correct image for Pinterest. So yeah, but it is I know you're going, oh my gosh, I got to make all these images for all these different networks. I got to get Instagram, I got to get Pinterest. The thing is, the time spent doing that has huge benefits.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually a one pin that Mike and I did. It was a show about creating a marketing plan, and I went to Deposit Photo. I found a great image with like a compass, and it looked engineering, like we were building something. Had a pretty cool kind of vintage text on it, and pinned it, and it sat there, did okay, and then all of a sudden it just took off. I think it's at like, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 repins right now, and that's always that's driving traffic back to my site. So yes, it took more time to do that, but it's worth it because, and I think you probably mentioned this in your Pinterest training, was that Pinterest has the best long-term traffic there is out there. And so it's worth it to make those images for Pinterest.
Yeah, totally agree about that. Now, going in a different direction for a second, what advice do you have for businesses that, because we have a lot of members who are like this, they're in a niche where it doesn't necessarily lend itself to gorgeous images. I mean, the boss's daughter's got a site that's all about a Caribbean island, so that's wonderful, and she's got a never-ending supply of beautiful images. Mm-hmm. But what about someone who's not quite so blessed with that kind of a resource?
Yeah, and it's always tough when you start thinking about it. I mean, even when I started my stuff, it's like, okay, how do I do it? You want to find your style, and you want to find something that will. Rebecca Radice and Peg Fitzpatrick, they talk about a style guide all the time. And so what they have done is they have nailed down their colors and they've nailed down their fonts. And once you do that, one, you can pass it over to designer anywhere to start using that. But that they know that's going to be part of their branding and they're part of their imaging. And then they build around that. So on some of that stuff, it will be hard. But once again, go to Google Images and type in maybe your your title of your blog post or even your industry and see what comes up, because you want to think about kind of going outside the box. Humor works really good too. I mean, if you can have some humorous kind of image that talks to, like, finances, like a banking industry, a banking thing can be really hard to talk about all the time. And so you just don't want to show pictures of money. And so they'll do other things like, how, what to do when your kid asks you for more allowance and they have a parent that are stressed, with their hands up. I mean, so try to think outside of the box. Don't just think of the title, exactly what the title says. Think of the emotions behind the title, or what that action that is happening with that title, like, how to increase your blog reach and not go crazy. I mean, it's the same thing. You could have somebody who looks bewildered, at the thing and have that title there. I mean, so you don't have to be so specific on every title that, are you on target with your marketing? You don't want to have just a dartboard there. I mean, that's pretty much everybody does. Try to think outside the box on some of these harder things and work that way.
Just take the selfie of the
exactly
bewildered person, and I didn't have to pay for that.
That's right, exactly. You do that. I mean, some of the stuff. There was one I got sponsored to do it was a paid thing for Braun, and I'm like, and it was about a beard trimmer, and I'm like, I'm not trimming my beard, you know. And so it was like how to trim your beard and still be manly. And I had a picture of a dog. I had a puppy, this real cute puppy, licking my face and doing something weird like that. And so that had nothing. I mean, that if that was really an odd image, if you really think about it, but it really works
Mm.
because of the way, you know, kind of a hairy dude and a puppy. I mean, so think outside of the box and try to, you know, for those industries that are really, really, really tough. So
Yeah, that's good advice. You know, and the reality is, it is a little harder. It is a little more challenging, and it's possible that you might be in a niche where Pinterest isn't the best fit. But if you can, you know, do what Jeff was just saying, and try to think outside the box and find some creative ways to put people and emotion and reaction into your imagery. So, you know, now that we've covered that, you mentioned something that I thought was really important. You talked about what Peg and Rebecca have done with their branding and their imagery.
mm-hmm.
So I want to explore that for just a second, kind of go backwards for a moment, because that's, I think, a really important part of having not just one or two successful pins on Pinterest, but having a successful presence on Pinterest and really any social network. You know, so can you speak a little bit more to establishing that look?
Yeah, and if you go back and look at the original stuff I started with and what I have now, and the funny thing is, it's the same way with Peg and Rebecca, Peg Fitzpatrick and Rebecca Radice. If you look at their brands on Instagram or even on their website, you'll see that it changes, but there's some core stuff that sticks through. Especially Rebecca, she's always kept her colors, and so that's always stayed through. And she even tried having a little like cartoon girl on some of her pins, and then tested it without it, and then tested it with it. So you're always going to be testing. When I started, it was all over the place, and then I kind of landed on retro, vintage kind of look. So all of my images, no matter what and where they are, on what platform, they have that little style to them. Even if it's subtle, there's that little style. So, and it may take you a while to nail that down, but you know, work on that. So what do you like too? I mean, I like that style, and that I was like, okay, I can learn how to do that. And I found some templates and I started using that. Now I know what fonts to use. I know what, you know, filters I need to put on the image. I know all my images most of the time have what's called a vignette on it, which means that corners are darkened, and that has a retro feel to it. And that's just a standard thing with all my shots. And people may not notice that I do that, but they may subconsciously because it fits in my brand. So work on what you like and then nail that down. And then it's also easier when you have like a style guide that you have come up with to pass it off to somebody else. So if you do get swamped and you do need to make a lot of changes to your site, you can just hand a designer and go, here they are, go to town. And so that's what it's really, it takes time up front, but just like everything else, when you stop and plan things out, then the process afterwards starts laying down a lot faster.
Yeah. In fact, another great site that you clued me into was Creative Market. Did I get that right? CreativeMarket.com, right?
Yeah.
And you know, for everyone listening, sign up for a free account to Creative Market, and I think it's once a week they'll send out free resources. Some of them are like for print work, so that might not really apply, you know, to some of you listening, or most of you listening. But usually there's a packet like of social media posts, you know, or fonts. There's always a font or two.
Right. And
Every
most all
week.
their fonts there are commercial use. So that's where I bought a lot of fonts that I'm going to use for projects that I'm going to print and sell. So
yeah, I mean, to me, frankly, the danger there is that every week you're going to be downloading a bunch of zip files, and I'll get to this. I'll use it. You fill up your computer pretty fast with stuff.
They even have a cool way that you can just sync your Dropbox. So I have a Dropbox, and I just click a button to sync it. And I'm like, there it is. So
try to remember that, right?
Yeah.
So I saw one question. I'm trying to keep an eye on the questions in the other window here. Nancy Yorick asks, how do you test Pinterest image effectiveness?
I'll do a lot of split tests on stuff. So I will check, and the thing is, if you have time, it's a great thing to do, because there's nothing wrong with having multiple pins that go back to your content. In fact, Peg Fitzpatrick does this all the time. She'll go back to evergreen posts. And when we talk about evergreen, we're talking about their posts that are still active. I mean, they're still relevant to the audience. They're not like cell phone, flip phone statistics from 2001. They're actually something that still makes sense, like how to write a blog. That still is applicable today. So she will make a new pin for it, even though she's pinned it a bunch of times with this old one. And so you can make 3 or 4 pins and then split test them. You could even use Pinterest ad their promoted pins product if you wanted to give them a paid boost and split test them that way. So yes, I think that that's a great way to test effectiveness. If for some reason when you're starting what we talked about earlier and you're doing, trying to figure out your brand and the colors and nothing's going, then it may be time to go back and, sit with the designer and say, that's not working. Why not? And try to figure out why. But Pinterest, you got to give some time to. It's not instantaneous as some of the other networks. It took a while for me to start gaining traction.
Yeah, and so for Nancy and the others, one of the things you'll be looking at is how many repins that pin got and how much traffic it's sending to your site. So I would say when you set up those pins, use some UTM parameters on the link. That way you can go into Google Analytics and you can exactly see how much traffic each one of those sent that page or your site in general, and kind of measure it that way.
And then at Social Media Examiner, we actually have UTM parameters all the way down to the month, because we can see how, okay, when is it starting to take off? When is it starting to get traffic to our site? And a lot of times it's not the first week. It can be even 3 or 4 weeks later. So that's really telling for us that it's a long-term thing. But for Social Media Examiner, Pinterest is second in traffic for social networks, right behind Facebook. So it eclipsed Twitter and all those other ones. So.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Nancy. That was a great question, and I know there's probably some additional follow-up questions. We're going to have Elisa Meredith on here probably in a couple of weeks, and we're going to talk about promoted pins and how we could use those for split testing, and we'll definitely dive into some of the details like analytics and UTM parameters. So if you didn't quite follow all that, don't worry. We will cover that soon. So shifting gears for again, let's talk about boards, because that's one of those things with Pinterest that people don't get, because it's usual and specific to Pinterest. So everyone should have gone through enough of the action guide at this point that they understand what boards are and how to create a board and that sort of thing. But at a kind of a more existential level, how do you organize like your boards, and do you use secret boards? And you don't have to tell us what they're for. Just tell us if you.
Yeah, they're not that secret. Yeah, I use both of those, and I use them for clients. For a business site, secret boards are great because I don't like to have a board set up that doesn't have less than 10 pins. So I will have a board secret and be pinning content to that. Like, let's say I'm working for a fashion company and they have a spring, like a July 4th style guide. So I will be pinning content to that till I at least get 10 pins. Then I'll make it public. And that way it looks full, like it's been there. The other thing about boards is I always like to rotate them to the top. So depending on season. So that July board, I will move to the top. You just drag it up to the top, so it's right there. I also like to have my boards, the ones that are most important to me. So like my content, my podcast, and that kind of stuff. And then I put all my group boards to the bottom because that's other people's stuff. They're great, but anyway. One of the things people don't realize when they first start on Pinterest, that when people follow you, a lot of times they're not following your entire account. They may just follow a certain board. So you want to make sure that, one, you're pinning to different topics, but also that if you see a board, and I use Tailwind for my analytics, as well as Pinterest, but that gives me insight on my boards. And so if I see a board that's doing really well, like my blog tips, or like if I'm seeing like Facebook marketing board that I have is doing really well and people are like repinning a lot to that, then that tells me I need to start thinking about putting more content there, and kind of like what Peg says is to feed the content monster. So I watch those boards to see what they are. And that's the cool thing about Pinterest. I've got a lot of people. I have a woodworking board on my site. I have a lot of people who follow that and don't follow me for social media stuff. And so that's fine. I like having multiple, things on Pinterest, and because people don't have to follow you. And so like a fashion brand I just worked with not very long ago, they had their fashion boards and stuff with their products, but their brand, it fit to have cocktails because it was that made sense to their audience. And so they had a cocktail board. They had certain colors board, for certain colors of outfits. They had, destinations that would fit to their audience. So just like any other social network, Pinterest is a place where you want to be serving your audience. You don't want to be always just shouting your product or shouting your blog or whatever. You want to be looking at your audience and giving them what they want, and then you trickle in your content. And then they're much more likely to click on that or to share it or to repin it because they trust you because you're giving them good content.
So when you're doing that, that means then that you're not always pinning your own stuff. Is that right?
Right. So I'm probably pinned like 90% other people's stuff and maybe just 10% mine. Now mine is trickled in there a ton. And I use, like I mentioned, Tailwind to schedule my post with. And so my thing is always I'm pinning to help my audience. Like I'll pin Michael write something about Facebook, and so I'll pin that to my Facebook post. Elisa will write something about Pinterest that's really good. I'll pin that to my Pinterest board. And even though we are technically, Elisa and I are competitors, because we both talk about Pinterest and social media, and Mike and I talk about social media, it's all about collaboration. It's all about serving your audience. Your audience doesn't care. They want content that will help them. And that's what your job is on Pinterest, is to give them content that helps them. One of the things, always check your pins. Click on the link to make sure that they go back to where they say you are, because that's all about your audience. You want them to trust you. And if they click on a pin, they're expecting to go somewhere so they can find out more information. And so you always want to make sure you do that. You will, as you go with Pinterest, you'll find people. Like I know pretty much now, I don't have to check Mike's pins because I know he does. And so I can pin those without worry. Same with Peg and some of the other people. And that just comes over time. But back to the boards. So yeah, I rotate them. I'll change the title if they're not performing well. But the boards can rank in Google. Like Instant Instagram Tips is one that ranks for Peg and me, and it's a group board that we have together. So it ranks really well. But yeah, so look at the titles, fill out the titles and the descriptions in your group board. You want to think basic SEO kind of strategy, but you don't want to keyword stuff. You want it to feel really natural if people read those descriptions. But then, if it fits with your brand, then, you don't have to just have your content there. You could have something that would fit to your audience. Like if you were a banking thing, it could be a board for college saving tips, because it still has to do with finance. It may not be your, thing you're offering, but it still would be helpful for your audience.
Right. And it's interesting because you and I are kind of blessed to be in this industry where, like you said, we're competitors, but not really.
Right.
Everybody gets along, and it's a lot easier to share each other's stuff. I get that not everybody is in that kind of situation.
Right.
So definitely, if you have a direct competitor, you don't need to pin their stuff. No. You don't need to advertise for them or send traffic to their site. Of course not. I'm sure there are other similar businesses, similar sites, pieces of information that you can find from other sources that relate, maybe even tangentially, to what it is that you're talking about, and help fill your boards that way. But I think your advice is spot on in terms of having the majority of your content not be actually your content, right? The majority of your pins are from other people's sites. And you mentioned Tailwind. For everyone listening, we're going to do a deep dive into Tailwind later on. It's later in the action guide, later in the challenge. They're a partner with us. If you aren't using Tailwind yet, you'll be able to sign up at a discount. And it's a tool that I use as well as Jeff. It's really great for not only scheduling pins, but actually finding great pins. And I know that's another concern everybody has. How do I find all this content? Well, you can use Tailwind to pick a board that you want to work on, and Tailwind will go out and find really not only good content, but pins that are performing well, so that when you pin them, they're going to continue to perform well in your account. So that's all great advice.
And most businesses should already know their customer, kind of what they call the avatar or whatever. And
Mm.
if you do know that, then you know what they're interested in. I mean, you should, as a business, know kind of what you're. I mean, if you're doing it, right, you should know what your business wants, your customer wants, and so that can help you also figure out. Okay, sometimes it's a stretch, and you may have a board that is like nobody cares about, and you just delete it. Doesn't matter, or pin it, or make it secret again. That's fine to do. I mean, just now if you have like 6,000 followers to it, you may want to rethink it, even though because you don't want to disappoint those people. But yeah, so that's kind of my strategies on boards.
One of the question about boards. How much do you pay attention to the board cover?
Um, I kind of do. I don't do a ton. Now, some people like if you're a fashion brand or really doing a product, I think it makes more sense because people will go to your brand page and look at it. Um, Pinterest has kind of changed. Now, there's a new thing called a carousel thing at the very top where you can put your most popular boards. I think it's worth doing that and setting that up correctly. Um, what Pinterest does, if you use those portrait images for the cover photo, it'll take the square image out of the middle of that. So make sure if you're doing a text overlay that you have your text in the center of your pin. That's your pin that you want it to be your cover board, because that way it'll be centered on your screen in the profile. I mean the cover photo. But I don't spend a lot of time on them. Some people do. Like I said, I think if it's a fashion brand, it makes sense to do because everyone wants to look out. Mine's an eclectic mix of crazy things, so it doesn't really matter too much to me.
And you mentioned board order, and I know that's different on desktop versus mobile.
Right.
Do we care?
Uh, I I would rotate based on season. So, like, and Tailwind has a great guide. I think it's actually on their site. Pinterest starts stuff a lot earlier. I mean, people are going to start soon in July pinning stuff for Christmas. So, I mean, it starts early, but it
What?
makes sense because
You did not just say that.
I did. Let me see. I gotta think. Yeah. So this is from Ology. So we're coming up in July. Yeah. Start pinning stuff for Christmas because
Oh my gosh.
and Halloween stuff starts in August. Back to school, it starts in the middle of July. Because there's that kind of long-term stuff, it makes sense to do that. So, yeah, you kind of have to think ahead because if you start December and you're just pinning your Christmas stuff, you are too late. You really are. So, anyway, it's really strange about that, but it does work, and people do see a lot of traffic. Pinterest drives a lot of traffic during Black Friday and the holiday sales, so just be aware of that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just gonna look real quick, see if there's any other questions that popped in. And while I'm looking at that, what would you say your number one tip might be for someone who's just starting on Pinterest?
I would say you have to use a scheduling tool because much as you love Pinterest, and I like Pinterest a lot, I can't spend all day there. Uh, so use a scheduling tool. Tailwind or Buffer is another option. I always make sure that whatever tool you're using is an authorized Pinterest marketing partner. There's some other tools out there that a lot of bloggers use, and I won't say the name, but it's Board Booster, and I wouldn't use it because technically you're breaking Pinterest terms of service. I don't want to do if I've got I don't even know. I think I have 32,000. I don't know how many people follow me on Pinterest. I don't want to jeopardize that at all.
Yeah.
So why would I mess with something that technically is breaking the terms of service, no matter how great they say it is? So I'm not going to use it. And I even see big bloggers recommending it, and I'm just like, don't mess with stuff that could get your account in trouble. I mean, Pinterest has kind of looked the other way of now, but if they're talking about wanting to be sold as a public company, they may come cracking down on that stuff. We just don't know. So, and this is just good practice for any social network. Just use stuff that doesn't break their terms of service because that's just too dangerous to mess with.
Yeah, and we've seen the same thing on the Instagram side,
Mhm.
with a bunch of apps being shut down, totally shut down in recent months, and people's accounts being put in jeopardy. And there's a couple. Kat asked a question: "What about Hootsuite?" Yeah, Hootsuite is an official partner. Others, they'll just tell you. Basically, when you go to set up your Pinterest profile within the tool, if you click a button that takes you to a Pinterest.com screen where you have to click another button while you're logged in to authorize that tool, that tells you that they're legit. If they ask you to type in your username and password, they're not legit and run away as fast as you can. Those are not the tools that you want to use.
And I think if you go to business.pinterest.com, you can get the all the people who are official development partners or marketing partners with Pinterest listed on the site. So,
yep. So one last question I've seen come up a couple different times, and I'm gonna tell you how I answer this question, and then you can jump in if you want. The question is, how much time do you spend? And to me, it's a dangerous question, because if you as a business owner are asking me, Mike Alton, how much time I spend on social media, my answer is you don't want to know, because this is what I do. I do marketing and I study this stuff, and so I typically spend more time on social media than what I would recommend a normal business owner do, because it's not comparing apples to apples. But I will say, the more time that you invest into a social network, generally speaking, the more you're going to get out of it. If you're doing, the right tactics the right way, if you're spending time connecting with people, following good accounts, sharing good content, engaging, creating opportunities for people to find you, and by finding your content, go to your site, that's all time well spent. I don't know if you have any different thoughts on that.
yeah, I was initially attracted to Pinterest, one because it's bright and shiny and it's visual, which is all guys like. Um, but it doesn't take a lot of work. It's not hard if you get stuff set up in this guide that you guys have, and doing the best practices in there. Once it's set up and you've got it going, it doesn't take long to a day to go in and make sure your queue is full for what's going to be pinned when you use a scheduler. And then, like, when I'm just finding content throughout the day, I'll pin something that, but I don't spend a ton of time on it. I never have. And so get it set up correctly. I mean, a lot of my clients, I'll go in 5 minutes a day, and then they're set up and they're good to go, and they're getting traffic. And, you're going in there and you want to make sure comments on Pinterest, if you get a comment, those are rare than most social networks. So you want to make sure you talk to that person. If they say something that's valuable and not a robot or something like that, then answer them, go in there and because that's a hot lead, I would say, and, talk to them. But yeah, and Pinterest isn't a social network really. It's more of a visual search engine.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly what we've been saying. So, that's it. That's it for our questions. So for those of you who are watching live, or if you end up watching this on the replay, which is great, if you have more questions, by all means, put them in the forums. We'll get them answered. In the meantime, Jeff, where can everybody find you?
The best place is at manlypinteresttips.com. We're always adding testosterone one pin at a time.
Awesome. So thanks again, everyone. That concludes today's Pinterest webinar. Like I said, stay tuned for details about our next webinar happening in a couple of weeks. Until then, have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.